again?
No, it's just the recording.
Okay. A couple of years ago, I started using this analogy about lakes being like leaky boats, and it seems to help people grasp what's going on and why things work or don't work. So you got a leaky boat, accumulates water. Could be a huge gash, could be a tiny hole, maybe just a loose rivet or two. But once the water gets in the boat, it's useless. Now you can patch the leaks. Obviously that's a need, but if the water is still in the boat, it's still useless. So there's two processes for fixing that leaky boat, and both are essential. So when you look at this as a lake, the watershed is subject to a whole lot of processes that add nutrients and other contaminants to the lake. It's the same thing as the water getting into the leaky boat. It's a natural process. I mean, even a boat sitting out is going to get some rainwater, maybe a wave slops over the side, everything accumulates. But human activities greatly accelerate that process. If you are aware of a lake that has gone bad in your lifetime, it's almost undoubtedly due to human processes. The natural process is a 1,000-year-plus thing. It doesn't happen quickly. Now, there are ones like that, and there's some suggestion that Unity Pond was never all that clear. I did my doctoral work on Oneida Lake in New York. They knew that lake was eutrophic, that it was green, that it had fertility problems 350 years ago, at least, maybe longer. So not all lakes are, pure and clean in their natural state. It depends a lot on the watershed and how long the boat has been leaking. So the lakes become more fertile over time. That's this process called eutrophication, and use impairment occurs as a result, typically algae blooms or sometimes rooted plants. Okay, so if you're going to fix the boat, pretty straightforward, you patch the leaks. Well, that's the watershed management. And you bail out the water. That's taking care of the internal load of nutrients that have accumulated over time. Both processes are needed. The level of application is going to vary. If I've got a boat with a little nick in it, 2 inches below the gunnel, I'm going to have to load that up with a whole lot of people before that leak is ever an issue. If I have a loose rivet or two somewhere on the bottom, water's going to come in, but I go out and scoop out 2 gallons in the morning and I'm good for fishing the whole day. Maybe I won't bother patching, at least not during that season. But if I've got a huge gash in the side where I can see the boat filling up as I pull away from the dock, it's got to be fixed. So you have to know where your watershed and lake stand on this leaky boat scale. Internal load control is what bails out the excess nutrients. Mainly phosphorus is what we focus on. All the nutrients are important. Phosphorus is not always the one that limits. In fact, when you get blue-green algae blooms, cyanobacteria blooms, usually that's a function of nitrogen limitation because many of the cyanobacteria can utilize dissolved nitrogen gas. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. We're not going to make nitrogen limiting on a regular basis. So we still go after the phosphorus. But all the nutrients are important. Iron figures into it, silica figures into it. You have to pay attention to all of it. The good news is most things we do to control phosphorus also help with some of the other nutrients. But if you can keep phosphorus low, you can pretty much guarantee that you won't have a problem. Because where you keep it low matters. It's not just in the water column. Some of these algae grow right at the sediment water interface and float up, and I'll come back to that. All right, so the external loading from the watershed can actually overwhelm the ability of the lake to handle those nutrients. It's how most internal loading gets started, but as the internal load builds over time, it can overshadow the watershed loading and become the primary source of phosphorus. At that point, the watershed doesn't matter anymore. Oh, it's still adding things in, but if you took the entire watershed away, the internal load could still cause problems. Now, watershed management protects the lake, but it's rarely sufficient to totally rehabilitate a lake. Again, the whole idea of that leaky boat, if I don't patch the leaks, I'm going to have trouble. But if I patch the leaks and if my boat's still full of water, I still have trouble. So you have to deal with the in-lake part as well. Again, that leaky boat analogy fits pretty well. And across the bottom, I'm just showing a bunch of different watershed management techniques. This is the stuff that Jen is particularly good at, and it's covered in your plan. It's important to do all this, but what most people wanted to hear from me today was how you deal with the internal load. Just one other thing, there are limits to watershed management. No best management practice, that's a BMP, is going to make that land on the right-hand side of that picture behave like it's the land on the left-hand side. That's not realistic. When you get a highly urbanized or agricultural watershed, you're in trouble. The threshold is somewhere around 30%, 25, 30% of the watershed area being developed as urban or agricultural land. You're almost guaranteed problems. You can deal with them, but you're going to have problems. Your boat is going to leak. For any impact at all, it's usually around 10%. So if you stay under 10%, 90% of your watershed is in its natural uses, forest, wetland, whatever, meadow, not pasture, but meadow, you're probably okay. And the good news in Maine is there aren't that many lakes that are over that 30% level, but a lot of them are at the 10% plus level. So there's some potential for those leaks. Obviously, preventing the watershed from having a problem in the first place is extremely desirable, but challenging. Early in my career, I was asked by a lake association, if there's one thing we could do for our lake, what would it be? And I said, move out of the watershed. And there was a silence. Somebody said, all right, if there were two things, what would the second one be? You know, you can't get to be realistic. I mean, if you look at that picture at the bottom, nobody's going to turn that land on the right back into forested land. It's serving a useful residential and commercial and industrial purpose. You know, that's life. So you have to deal with the issues. You want to control the leaks to the best of your ability, which may not be complete, and then you want to deal with the in-lake part. All right, so yeah, the good and the bad news in Maine, you know, watersheds do not tend to be overly developed in Maine. There's, you know, I think you have 20 of lakes are on a problem list relating to this. For the most part, you're in that mid-range where managing the watershed will make a lot of difference. The exception would be some of the agricultural watersheds where the agricultural land use is just so dominant and the impacts are very hard to avoid. You've got a few urban lakes, but not many. Again, fixing these small leaks, you know, the little watershed issues, the camp road, a little erosion on somebody's property, a sloping driveway that's not in any way controlled. They're not hard, but they mostly happen on private property. They're not expensive, but it all adds up over the whole watershed. That's why some of these numbers, you know, you see $1 million to fix stuff, like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from? It's hard, but it's a bunch of tiny little things that have to be done. The hit list is often several hundred parcels long, and all these things need to be dealt with to minimize the inputs. And that's minimize, not eliminate. So it's a little challenging, but you're in better shape in Maine than most places. All right, so shifting to the internal load. Okay, where does this come from? Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways that phosphorus can get recycled in the lake. Resuspension by wind, boats, even certain fish dig up the bottom. Release from aquatic plants. Some of them are leaky when they grow, and a lot of them put out phosphorus when they die off in the fall. Benthic invertebrates, little burrowers, often excrete stuff back out into the overlying water. Mineralization basically is just decay when there's plenty of oxygen. And then this release by redox reactions, that's oxidation reduction reactions, or I guess in order reduction oxidation reactions, which happen under low oxygen. Every one of these mechanisms plays a role. But when we really see problems is when the bottom one is dominant. I mean, you're going to have some resuspension. I am not telling you should restrict the boats or something. You worry about shoreline erosion for sure, but boats aren't stirring up the bottom to a huge degree in a lake that's more than 15 foot deep. Wind is a big issue, and much more so than boats. And fish are an issue, but if you're familiar with East Pond, they tried for years to get a lot of the perch and the other fish out that they thought were a problem, and it didn't work out too well. So you can't do a whole lot about that first one. The aquatic plants, if you've got serious issues with aquatic plants, they need to be controlled. But most lakes, they're part of a functioning ecosystem, and you're not trying to get rid of them. Benthic invertebrates, you've got very little control over. The mineralization, if that occurs, and it does, the decay of stuff, and there's enough of a phosphorus binder around, naturally it's usually iron and often aluminum or calcium in lakes, that will automatically glom onto the phosphorus and make it drop out. So mineralization is not that big a deal, except in some really shallow lakes that have a lot of muck. Again, comes down to that bottom one. When you have low oxygen conditions, and you have this oozy muck, and that's the lower right picture there. See a nice sandy substrate underneath that's still in sort of the shape of the core, and the upper oozy black stuff is just, almost a slurry. It just fell apart when I put the core in the pan. That's the stuff that's loaded with phosphorus. It's highly organic. It's highly oxygen demanding. It sucks the oxygen out of the overlying water. As a result, these reactions occur that put usually iron and phosphorus back up into the water column. At the very least, they release it at the sediment water interface. And even if there's oxygen above that would make them recombine and drop back out, there are algae that can grow at that sediment water interface, suck up that phosphorus, and then float up to form the bloom. That's how a lot of cyanobacteria blooms occur. So this is what's going on, the technical version of what's going on out there. We can maybe illustrate this a little better in terms of a visual you can hang on to. If you've got a lake that has low oxygen down, just in the deepest part, say on June 1st, if you look at that diagram in the center to the right there, less than 1 milligram per liter, and there's that little tiny piece that's sort of light brownish. That's not very much. And it's got a long way to go before it can reach light. It's not a big area, probably not going to be a big deal. But you keep losing oxygen over the summer. Now on July 1st, we're up to a lesser depth, and now we've got a much bigger area contributing with less of a distance to go to get up to where there's light. And I should add, light doesn't mean at the thermocline. For sure, things can grow at the thermocline. They can usually grow somewhat below the thermocline. So that arrow where it terminates at thermocline is not a hard and fast boundary. But the point is, you can see if you've got an oxygenated gauntlet above it and no light, that phosphorus isn't going to get used very much. But now you get to August 1st in our theoretical lake here. Now we're getting pretty close to the thermocline. We've got a huge bottom area exposed to low oxygen, leaking phosphorus back out into the water column. And they're in a zone where algae can use that phosphorus and have enough light to grow. And that's what gives you your blooms. Again, they come right off the sediment, or they can be growing somewhere near or below the thermocline as a layer and then pop up. So again, the diagram on the left just shows you what the typical oxygen profile may look like, and it's different depth range than your lake, but it's not way off. In June, it's not too bad, except right at the bottom. It's up to around 10 meters or 33 feet, in the beginning of July. And by August, it's approaching the thermocline, and you've lost a lot of oxygen over a big area. That's what goes on. So the real driver in this is a combination of accumulated phosphorus in the bottom, which came out of the watershed over a long period of time or a shorter period of time due to human actions, and the loss of oxygen. That's the trigger that let this stuff start recycling. All right, so what do you do about it? How do you bail? There's 4 methods, 3 of which are fairly valid. I'm going to start with the one that isn't. That's selective withdrawal. Not that it isn't helpful, it is. But again, writing this manual for Massachusetts, I've just been through all the case histories of these things. Selective withdrawal will move you in the right direction, but it won't get you to the destination. Basically, it's pulling water out of the deep zone, or in the fall when the lake mixes and while you still have some high phosphorus throughout the lake, flushing it and getting that downstream. So you're basically releasing poor quality water from the bottom, or drawing the lake down and getting as much water as you can reasonably do out of there in the fall while the phosphorus is still in the water column. So you're basically trying to flush out what accumulates each year. Well, at the most, you would expect 10% of what's in the upper layer of sediment to come out in any year. So there's 10 years before you've made a big difference. Also, that's only the upper 10 centimeters, 4 inches that we think of, and muck's liable to be a lot deeper than that. And the phosphorus is constantly migrating upward. So in the case histories we have, one of which is Sebasticook Lake from Maine, it took between 20 and 30 years to get a distinctly significant reduction in phosphorus, and they've never reached the target. I think Sebasticook, they were up in the 50 or 60 range and got down in the 20 to 30 range. The one I'm more familiar with is Neponset Reservoir in the shadow of Foxborough Stadium where the Patriots play. They did that one for about 25 years. And they went from like 100 micrograms per liter down to about 25. That's a huge reduction. That's very nice, but 25 is still going to cause blooms. So they're not where they need to be, and they waited 25 years to get there. I don't have many clients willing to wait 10 years, let alone 25, to see a difference in their lake. So I don't really put this one in the yeah, go for it category. Also, you're now either discharging poor quality water downstream into a river system that's got permitting issues, or you're drawing the lake down, which has other potential implications for the littoral zone, the area around the lake where the plants grow, and you've got to be able to refill it in the spring. So there's a whole lot of things to think about when you do the selective withdrawal. And for what you get for it, not that impressed. All right, dredging. Here's if I could do one thing in my lake, what would it be? If you could dredge the lake out and get rid of the offending sediment, set it back in time to a coarser substrate, you could do wonders. You would get rid of all the internal recycling. You'd reset the similar to the capacity of the lake. There's so many good things to be said for this. Unfortunately, it is ridiculously expensive. It is not easy to permit. It's ecologically very disruptive. Somebody likened dredging to burning down the house because of the termite infestation. Well, if it was that bad, maybe burn it down, get the insurance money and rebuild. But it's not an easy thing to do. It is a huge effort. If you're looking for a rule of thumb estimate, every acre foot, 1 acre area, 1 foot deep, is 1,613 cubic yards. You can expect that to cost about $50,000 to remove it. So multiply it out by the number of acres of lake you've got that would this be subject to, and an average depth of sediment, it's always in the millions of dollars, unless you're talking about a little pond. So we don't get to do a whole lot of dredging. It's a wonderful technique. It would work wonders for the lake, but you can't do it partially. You've got to do it right. And it's a big, big job. So we don't do a lot of this. Oxygenation or circulation. These are very popular. You see oxygenation a lot in drinking water reservoirs because they want to keep the oxygen in for a lot of other reasons. It improves water quality overall. Circulation you see more commonly for ponds and some recreational lakes where they just want to keep the lake mixed. The idea is that a lot of algae, particularly the cyanobacteria, don't like being moved up and down in the water column, and that's true. However, some algae are just fine with it. So unless you can guarantee you're going to keep the oxygen high near the bottom, you're going to have an issue in that the nutrients are going to be made even more available than they were before because it's being mixed throughout the lake. And unless the lake is deep enough to put the algae into darkness for a substantial amount of time, they're going to be just fine moving around. It probably won't be some of the problem cyanobacteria, but you'll get green algae or diatoms or other things. The lake will be brown or green. It just won't be toxic. That's an improvement, but these are not cheap systems either. I've messed around with a lot of different ones. I don't actually do the work, but I have recommended things and I have monitored things. The track record isn't great. Solar bees are popular, but they don't like to actually put them all the way down in the thermocline. They just mix the upper waters and sort of enhance wind action. It doesn't do much. You can do where you actually add oxygen to the bottom, and I'll show you a couple examples. It will greatly improve the habitat. We've got a lake on the Cape. It's only like 6 acres. And we have now we're in our 4th year and we've gotten better and better every year, but we just had a bloom starting 2 days ago. So we didn't make it through the summer without a bloom oxygenating. So there's issues in a lot of places. Theoretically, this has tremendous potential and it's a very flexible technique. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, as you're seeing in this diagram here. But again, nothing's easy. Okay, oxygenation and circulation works by these approaches. The red is just circulation. The black is oxygenation and circulation. This makes it look like circulation is a better choice because you get more potential benefits. That's not necessarily true. Just you can get some additional things out of circulation you don't get from pure oxygenation where you don't mix the lake. What you're really trying to do is make sure there's enough oxygen to facilitate phosphorus binding and keep it in the sediment. And that makes perfect sense. It's a rational, theoretical thing to do. In practice, it's turning out to be more difficult. I've seen success stories for sure, and it's particularly good in fairly deep lakes. Shallow lakes, a lot harder. It's a lot less efficient. Even the mixing a shallow lake, because you don't get a lot of horizontal mixing. The vertical distance the bubbles rise or that you pump water up or down, you're not going to get more than 20 times that in width of mixing zone going out for it. So if you have a 10-foot deep lake, you're not going to get more than 200-foot diameter thing out. You need a lot of diffusers, a lot of output ports, a lot of pump discharge locations. It gets very expensive. You wind up with this wild network of stuff, of piping out in your lake, not favored by DEP in Maine. There's some issues with basically they consider that to be like renting the lake bottom and you have to pay for it. And there's a lot of issues with this there. Not that it can't be done, not that it doesn't have solid theoretical basis, and not that there aren't good successes, but this is going to be a harder sell in Maine. All right, so destratifying oxidation, I'm talking about mixing the basic air bubbles that you put in, almost like an air stone in your aquarium, just keep the water moving. Tried and proven, works well to mix things, but mixing itself isn't necessarily going to get you where you want to be unless you guarantee you're going to keep the oxygen high near the bottom. You can use a downdraft or an updraft pump. That's basically just pulling the water up or pushing the water down. Theoretically, pushing the water down is better because you're always taking algae and pushing them into deeper water. If you pull water up and you're not doing enough of it, you're now going to be pulling poor quality bottom water from deeper down to the surface, and it's going to make things worse. I have seen circulation systems, diffused air circulation systems, do a horrible job because they didn't keep a good eye on the compressor. It overheated and shut down. The lake stratified quickly, lost oxygen, accumulated a lot of phosphorus. They come back and fix the compressor and start it up again, and now they're mixing all that stuff into the upper water column. It'd be the same idea for the updraft pumps if you don't have good conditions in the bottom. Downdraft pumps, you have less theoretical downside because you're always pushing the stuff down where you need oxygen and down where it's dark. But again, it's not 100%. A lot of these will extend benefits well into the summer, but it's hard to get through the whole summer because as the summer goes on, the water's getting warmer and warmer. You're not getting rid of heat, you're just mixing it. And it's harder, it takes more energy to mix warmer water. It's just a physical fact. So as a result, it gets harder and harder, and you have to build a much bigger, more powerful system that costs more if you want to cover the complete range of conditions. Okay, non-destratifying oxygenation. This is what a lot of water suppliers use. You can diffuse pure oxygen from the bottom, and if it's deep enough, all that oxygen will get sucked up before the bubbles cause any real mixing in the upper water. You can put oxygen or air into a chamber. The HAC is a hypolumitic aeration chamber, and then put it back out into the bottom. You can use something called downdraft bubble contact or space cone, where you put oxygen into a cone, inverted cone, and that's going up, and you pump the water in going down. The water gets oxygenated and it goes out through a diffuser pipe. Very successful in a number of places. The issue with this is the apparatus is all in the bottom of the lake. If anything goes wrong, you have to find a way to fix it. You got to get divers down there because these are big units and they're heavy. You don't just bring them up to the surface. Or the kind of the wave of the future is the side stream saturation system, or they call it dissolved oxygen technology, I think, or oxygen saturation technology, OST. Basically, you pull the water out of the lake, you oxygenate it under pressure so you can get a lot more oxygen in it, and then you put it back. And that's pretty neat stuff. That's what I'm doing in the one lake on the Cape. And it's done a remarkable job of keeping the oxygen up. But every so often, something goes wrong. We had a pump failure. It was down for 4 days. That was long enough to get some poor quality water. And now we have a bloom. So it's one of these things where it's always got to work. You got to stay on top of it. It's not the kind of thing lake associations like to get involved with. Water suppliers, big utilities, sure. But it can work. All right, so the key factors in oxygenation, circulation, you've got to put enough oxygen in. You can't do it halfway. You got to get the oxygen to the bottom. That's not easy to do. Circulation has to act on the whole water quality, or the whole water column, not part of it. And oxygenation has to work on the whole bottom layer, not part of it. You could get a reduced need over time, but you're always going to need to do it. I don't know of a single case that's ever said, well, we took care of that, we can get rid of that system now. It always goes on. Some of them drop to about a quarter of the effort that they were when they started, but they're still going on. Operational costs are significant. Eventually it'll be more than the capital cost. And again, permitting that can be an obstacle in Maine. All right, so that leaves me with phosphorus inactivation, which is what has been suggested as a possibility for your lake. It's been done a fair amount in Maine in the last few years. They actually did a raft of these 30 years ago, and 3 of the 4 were successful, and they've started redoing them again now. I get involved with a lot of these because 1, it works. 2, it tends to be affordable, although not cheap. You get a lot for it. I don't have a single system where we've done this where we haven't improved the lake markedly, but I do have systems where it didn't improve it as much as we thought it would. And I have a lot of systems where we didn't do it because there was still so many watershed problems, too many leaks in the boat, that this was not going to give you any lasting benefit, particularly for the money. So iron's the most common natural binder, but it won't hold phosphorus when there's no oxygen. That's an oxide. So that's what we're talking about. You say you get this redox reactions and so on. So you can't use iron unless you're also doing oxidation. And there's some water suppliers that do this very effectively, but you don't see it in recreational lakes much. Calcium can be used in high pH systems. They do that out in Alberta, Canada, and the plains. There's a few lakes that have high calcium in Western Connecticut and Massachusetts where this could work. And it worked to some degree naturally because when the soils erode from the watershed, they bring in lots of calcium and it makes a natural inactivation. But aluminum is the most commonly applied binder. And a lot of really cool research has actually been done in Maine to show that if you can get the aluminum to be 3 times as much as the iron in the sediment, you're not likely to have an internal recycling problem. And when you get down around 1-to-1, iron and aluminum being about the same amount, you have problems because the aluminum binds up the phosphorus and does not let it loose when there's a fluctuation in oxygen. Some lakes in Maine naturally are high in aluminum. I even have a couple in Massachusetts that are, and they don't have problems. So what we're doing is adding the aluminum to make this work. Lanthanum is more recently applied. It's a rare earth element. It's an Australian technique. It's been used in the US. It's used a lot more in Europe. Pretty effective. It's not approved yet for use in Massachusetts. They're worried about bioaccumulation and possible impacts on mussels, neither of which I think is really an issue. They just haven't gotten around to doing it. But you can use these techniques in the water column or the sediment or for inlets, and they provide a lot of water quality benefits. I find phosphorus inactivation to be a highly applicable technique under a wide range of conditions. Now, you need to know the existing load, particularly the internal versus the external. Again, leaky boat. If I got a huge gash in the side, and no matter what I do in the lake, it's going to fill up again fast. Or if I got a couple loose rivets that I can't find to fix, okay, I can get away with doing this in the lake or bailing out the water every so often, it'll work. What types of a sediment phosphorus do I have? How much of it is readily available? What's the bathymetry and the hydrology of the lake figures into how you do the treatment. What other water chemistry alteration might happen? You have to be very careful with pH. You can kill a lot of fish if you don't keep it balanced. What other receptors are there out might be an issue? And are there any accumulated residues? I can tell you that in about 25 years of using this technique, I am only aware of one lake where the accumulated residue made a difference. Most of the time, you can't even tell it was ever done. And again, it's the kind of thing that if you're doing it for sediment activation, you're not doing it more than once every 15, 20 years. So that last one hasn't been an issue, but you got to bring it up. All right, couple examples. Higher dose sediment phosphorus inactivation. This is binding up that redox sensitive phosphorus so it can't get out. The one I'm showing you at the bottom there is Hamblin Pond. That's out on the Cape. It's the first one I ever got involved with. I didn't actually do the treatment or monitor it. I just planned it. And they did a lousy job controlling the pH and they killed a lot of fish. But the reverse of the operation was success, but the patient died. The operation was a dismal mess, but the patient got way better. In fact, if you look at the graph there, the treatment where the red line is, and they got 18 years out of this. And you can see it gradually tailing off and then really going bad in 2014. The town, this is a big resort area. It's not just do it again. So we did a little more fancy sediment sampling. We knew more about how to figure doses than we did 18 years before. And we redid it in 2015. As you can see, things are great now. And I think they're going to be great for longer than 18 years. It worked out very, very well. And I have a bunch of these. This one's kind of the poster child for it, best documented and definitely worked well. But this is, it's pretty standard stuff. There's been 8 or 9 lakes done in Maine this way already, and they've all shown pretty good improvement. Okay, lower dose treatment to limit phosphorus in the water column. These are, you do 1 to 3 milligrams per liter once or twice in the summer. It clears the water. You did it in June and then maybe late July. You can inactivate some of the sediment phosphorus, but the dose isn't high enough to get it all. But if you get the superficial stuff, you buy time. And then you've also stripped it out of the water column. This has worked better than I thought it would work. This particular lake I'm showing you, Wood Pond, is a sister lake next door called Woodridge Lake. Same data for Woodridge. Basically, you can see the phosphorus, because of this internal loading, was spiking way up. I mean, this is 300 micrograms per liter on that peaks there. That's up there. I mean, anything over 10 is not good. Anything over 20, 25 is bad. That's the purple line is at 25 near the bottom. But you can see that we started doing these dosing. It's 1.2 milligrams per liter, 2.1, a little over 1, 2.4. We've tried different doses. We've settled in a little between 2 and 3. It's basically one tanker truckload that handles the two lakes. And you can see that we've driven the phosphorus concentrations down. We are not consistently below that 25 micrograms per liter. This lake has a serious problem watershed. It's almost completely urban. It has highway in it. It has lots of storm drains. It has no detention. It's a mess. The water coming in a big storm looks like chocolate milk. This clearly is maintenance. This is bailing out the boat every so often without fixing the leaks so that we can use the boat. It's second best. Those leaks need to be fixed. And there's a whole nother talk in the institutional inadequacy to get this job done. Not the lake association's fault, it's the state and the two towns. Bottom line, though, is that this is a problem watershed, but this simple technique has made it swimmable. It has eliminated cyanobacteria blooms for the last 6 years. Okay, you could also do tributary inactivation. If you have one major tributary coming in, or maybe two, and it's a real problem, you can treat the incoming water, particularly during storms, which is when the highest loading occurs. This one happens to be outside of Boston, and it's a 100-acre lake with a very expensive swimming beach on it, water supply wells adjacent to it. They'd like this lake to be clean. Well, it's got a watershed that's 50 times the size of the lake. It's full of residential housing and commercial establishments, and everything just blows into this lake. So we set up this dosing station. We're now using polyaluminum chloride. We changed some things over time. We have a couple pumps, one that handles each of these tributaries. In the lower right, this is a test. You wouldn't actually be able to see the chemical if it was raining because the water would be turbid, but you can see the stuff coming out when we were testing it to start it up. And what we wind up with here is that we reduced the phosphorus in the lake, really coming into the lake and then in the lake itself. And since we started treating, you can see we've knocked the algae way down. At the very end, this progression of increasing algae is interesting. We've been playing the game of how low can you go? How little can we use? And that took us through 2020. 2021, I don't know what it was like where you are, but it was the wettest summer we've ever had here. And we ran out of chemical right after 4th of July, and we didn't do it any. Usually we don't treat beyond that. And it rained for 17 straight days in July. So this lake just got loaded up, but the flushing rate was so high that it still didn't reach that red line. But this one was not a really good year for treatment because it just rained so much. All right, so I should add that right now, this year, with it being as dry as I've ever seen it, we have the clearest lake that we've seen. The lake looks wonderful. But again, we've only had to treat a little bit. All right, so general conclusions. Lake is a lot like a leaky boat. You've got to patch the leaks, but you also have to bail out the water if it's gotten filled to maintain its functionality. Watershed management is essential, but it has limits. Most watersheds in Maine should respond well to watershed management, and you need to do this. If you're expecting to get federal money or anything, they want to see the watershed work before they're going to let you do anything in the lake. They want to see the leaks plugged before they move on to bailing. Internal load control can be addressed a bunch of ways, but there's really only 3 that have shown success: dredging, oxygenation, phosphorus inactivation. Of those, phosphorus inactivation is the least expensive and the most flexible. Okay, for your own lake, it's got significant leaks and it's got water in the boat. You guys are right in the middle of this thing as far as we can tell. You've got issues. You've got a pretty big watershed. You've got some sources out there. It's diffuse. And it's been going on for a long time. Our best guess is that your lake was not, crystal clear, 25-foot Secchi discs, even before settlers came here. But it's gotten worse, clearly. And there's definitely a human element to it. The data are limited for assessing the internal load. What we have done is somewhat speculative from very limited data, and you need more data on that. It's kind of like, what size bailer do I need to bail this out? We don't truly know, but it's obvious there is an issue. You look at those things at the bottom there, it's showing your watershed load is about 3/4 of the total and your internal load's about 20%. That might make you think the watershed load is the complete name of the game, but the reality is that watershed load is divided over a whole year. So about 1/4 per season, technically a little more in spring, a little less in summer. That internal load is almost entirely a summer function. So if you divide your 76% by 4, that's less than the internal load at 20%. So that internal load is that extra boost that puts you over the limit in the summer. If you push yourself back and stay below the limit by just dealing with internal load, you can expect better conditions for a while, but not indefinitely, because the watershed's going to overwhelm that probably within a few years. Then we look at the load generation by cover category, it's a lot more evenly split. You know, you've got a lot of different contributors here. Some of them don't represent that big an area to contribute what they're contributing. But the point is, you can't just go after one source. It's not just about development. It's not just about agriculture. You have to deal with everything. And that is it. I can stop at that point and address any questions you might have.
Who's got some good questions? Ken. I have one. Ken, can you talk a little bit about aluminum sulfide? The chemical, is it a chemical? Is it an element? How common is it?
Okay, aluminum comes in multiple formulations. What we use most often in lakes is a combination of aluminum sulfate, which the common name is alum, and sodium aluminate, which is often just called aluminate or SOL. They exist as solids, but usually in a lake treatment, they come as liquid in a tanker truck. You put it out, you know, if you poured that stuff out of the tanker truck and onto your skin, it would burn you. It's not good stuff. I sure wouldn't put it on my cereal, though it looks whitish like something you might do that. You know, it's a chemical. I'm not going to tell you it isn't, but it's not an algicide. It's not an herbicide. It's not trying to kill anything. It's basically an anti-fertilizer. And if you put it in at a pH between 6 and 8, which is where most of our lakes are, and you keep the pH in there by balancing the ratio of the chemicals, it's almost impossible to have any toxicity. There's just not enough active aluminum at any instant in time. Now, we also tend to limit the amount we put in at once. So I like to see no more than 5 milligrams per liter. In the lab, we find that if you have 10 milligrams per liter or more of aluminum as total, you could have toxic effects. There'll be enough active aluminum as a subset of that to cause fish death. Not necessarily wholesale, but some. We keep it down to 5 milligrams per liter. So it's a margin of safety. We also treat in a patchwork. Think of the layout of where you're treating as a checkerboard. We never do 2 contiguous ones in a row unless we run out of space. So we give a spatial buffer that, you know, fish can move out of the way. We give a concentration buffer, and we balance the pH to minimize the amount of active aluminum at any instant in time. The reality is that the last fish kills that I'm aware of in New England were in 1995, that one at Hamblin Pond, and another one in 2000, which is what caused us to go into the lab and go, okay, why is this happening? And figure all this out. There has not been a fish kill in New England that I'm aware of relating to an aluminum treatment in 22 years. You know, they've got this down. And there's really one big company that does them all. It was 2 companies, they've merged, and they know what they're doing. We have not had problems. So it's, you know, I'm not going to tell you that this is a non-hazardous chemical. It absolutely is. It's corrosive. But again, they use it in water treatment plants all the time. I don't know where everybody here gets their water from, but, you know, like the Kennebec Water District uses it. You know, lots of water districts. I mean, that's why the stuff exists. They don't make it just to be used in lakes. It gets made for water treatment. Wastewater treatment plants use it, and water treatment plants use it. In fact, water treatment plants use more than wastewater treatment plants because you need a higher dose to clean up cleaner water. So yeah, they put in as much as 20 milligrams per liter. We don't go higher than 5. So what goes in the drinking water is often higher than what we would put in the lake. And again, it settles out. It's gone in a day out of the water column. There'll be a little bit of residual that might last 2 months, but it's not enough to be toxic to anything. And it's fine if that it basically all goes into the sediment, interacts there. congeals, and it's done wonders. It really has. And again, not without risks, not perfect, not better than fixing the watershed in the first place. But again, if you got a boat full of water, you still got to bail out somehow. And this is, short of dredging, the best method I've had, and way, way cheaper.
Could you speak on, you mentioned limited data. I know when we began this, we rolled with, there was a college student at Unity College had done a thesis on sedimentation cores. Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, there's two sources of data. There's a couple samples that the state took back a ways and had run at UMaine, and then you have the work that was done there at the college. The testing was limited. I think 2 samples in the one and 5 in the other. And we're talking about several hundred acres of target area. Typically, you do a sample for every 30 to 50 acres. You know, you got to look at the variability over space and time. So what we've extrapolated out is based on insufficient number of samples to be very sure of it. It's pretty obvious there's an issue, and I don't suspect I'll find anything truly unusual, like it's one tiny area and the rest of it's fine, or that it's bad everywhere, because the samples were mostly at the deeper zones. You know, it's where the muck forms, which is usually out between 15 and 20 feet in most lakes. Again, there could be shallow embayments and such, and where the oxygen is low, which is usually deeper than about 20 feet. And, you know, what we have for data are adequate to do what Jen's been doing with your watershed-based management plan. But to proceed further, I think you'll need more data, at least for the in-lake part, particularly for the sediment.
Do you have a cost estimate on that analysis?
But how it's done?
Oh, a cost estimate.
Yeah, well, you take samples and you lay out sort of a grid and decide how many you need. And again, we haven't done this specifically for yours, but 10 or a dozen would seem logical to me. And then they go to a lab that can do these different extractions. So they figure out how much is bound up in iron, how much is already bound up in aluminum, how much is bound up in organic matter that might decay. And you get all these different parts of it. And then you can figure out from there what kind of dosing you need. We even have an assay we've developed where we add aluminum to a little bit of sediment and see what we get for it. So we can actually fine tune the doses there. Now, the reality is that usually the doses converge on some central tendency. And in Maine, that's about 35 to 40 grams of aluminum per square meter of bottom. And so, if somebody had to pull a number out of the air, yeah, your treatment's probably going to be 35 or 40 grams per square meter. I've had treatments work with as little as 10 grams per square meter. And I have other ones I've had to use over 100. So we kind of like to get the real data and not guess at it. But I'm writing that lake manual for Massachusetts, and one of the reviewers who's retired from Mass DEP said, I think you should just recommend 50 grams per square meter and they should just approve it by rote. That's real easy to say when you're retired. But yeah, it's a challenge. But I mean, most of the doses converge somewhere in the mid double-digit grams per square meter. And even if it's not enough for the long term, you will get immediate results. Anything over 20, 25 grams per square meter is going to inactivate the superficial phosphorus. And then it's going to take a few years for the stuff deeper down to migrate up. So if you did, say you couldn't afford a full treatment, you just did one of those partial treatments or water column doses, you would see tremendous results, and it would help you in that given year. It just might not last more than a couple of years.
Right. A question.
Turn that camera. We have a question from the audience.
Dr. Wagner, we have 3 sources of water coming into our lake. It's Brook, Meadowbrook, and the main one is Cotton Bog Stream. If we put aluminum pumping station on Cotton Bog Stream, and we have the ability to put flashboards on the outlet going to 25 mile stream, could this be not a permanent fix or a total fix, but a partial fix to this? And this might be something that might be financially doable for our pond.
Okay, it would help. But again, in that case, you'd be sort of artificially patching a leak. I guess it's like putting duct tape over the loose rivet instead of resealing it. You know, it would work for a while. You're better off doing the watershed work, but it's true. This would give you immediate results. You'd be taking everything coming out of that drainage area, treating it and improving the quality. That's what I do with that one outside of Boston. And it's worked extremely well. And we only do it for 2 months of the year. We start a little before Memorial Day, and we usually end a little after 4th of July. And then we let it go at that point, unless we've got extra chemical left like we do this year, because we didn't treat that much. That's what you'd be doing. It's philosophically very dissatisfying because you're not really getting at the cause. You're just treating the symptom. But in terms of getting immediate results, yes, it would work. Now, it's not necessarily going to take care of the internal load, because that stuff's going to settle out pretty quickly when it comes into the lake. And the places where your internal load is a problem now is in the deeper water. So I don't know that it would solve that part of the problem. You would need a direct treatment for that. Also, keep in mind you have sandy stream, which only backs up into the lake part of the time, but we do not have the data to know how big a chunk that is. We've made a reasonable estimate. I don't think it's an overwhelming part of it, but you actually have a fourth source you have to worry about.
Thank you.
Question. I thought that Sandy Stream and 25 Mile Stream, because of their proximity, contributed to the really slow refreshing of Unity Pond, and it was a poor refresher, and that was probably some of the stagnancy problem of the lake. Is that correct?
You got to say that one again. I had some trouble hearing it. It's a bit of an echo.
I'll bring that microphone over, but I think I could touch on it. What we know is the lake flushes 1.2 times per year, and that's actually not bad compared to other lakes. It's not great, but it's not bad. And what we did find during our study, again, limited data, there were some issues. What we did find is during rain events, that sandy stream comes into the lake.
Yep.
Actually bypasses 25 Mile Stream and drains into the lake for a 24 to 48 hour period during heavy rain events. Or
Yep.
during
Those are the kind of data you need. You actually have to have storm events to see what's going on. And it's hard to get enough stormwater data to really know, but just to get a feel for it. I mean, sometimes just looking at it, you can tell when the stuff comes in looking like chocolate milk, you know. And in the dry conditions, the flows go down, the water clears up. You kind of realize that it's storm driven. Stormwater usually is 3/4 of the loading to the lake, or that's when it arrives at least. And of course, it's only 20% of the time that you have those conditions, but it's 3/4 of the load in most cases, sometimes more.
But again, that is definitely an issue, mixing of sandy stream and where it is, turns into 25 Mile. It's definitely an issue. We have more studying to do.
One thought I had,
Chris, turn that around so it catches the microphone.
one thought I had was that if you go back to where Sandy Stream and 25 Mile Stream meet, and it's shallow water, and if there was a levee or like a jetty that started there and went to the lake underneath the trestle, and it's shallow water out to that uplift of the ledge where the peninsula past the boat launch is. If you were able to take riprap and rubble and create this jetty that was above the surface water, would that then deny access of water and allow Sandy Stream as an inlet to pump into the lake, have the water come back out of the sandy or the lake to 25 Mile Stream and increase that flush or circulation of the lake? Would that help with the phosphorus removal and oxygenation of the lake? Or is the phosphorus primarily embedded in the bottom soil of the lake down in the deeper water, and that wouldn't really have an effect?
Well, it's both. The phosphorus is coming from the watershed and the phosphorus is coming from inside the lake as we look at the balance there, and it's about equal during the summer. The thing with Sandy Stream, and I may have misunderstood you, that backup is, I mean, to some degree natural, but of course, with a somewhat developed watershed, you're getting more and higher flows. So the backup may not be a totally natural event. There are lakes that practice diversion where they keep that sort of thing from happening, actually reducing the flow, not increasing it, or you're trying to use it as a flushing event. I have one that's an old project we did where one lake is kind of a dead end of the other. It's technically not separate from it. It's just there's a narrow constriction where a road goes over. We actually put in a sluice gate that we could raise or lower, and they put it down when it rained so that the poor quality water entering the first lake wouldn't back up into the dead end lake and just sit there. So you could do something like that, or build a berm to prevent sandy stream from backing up, because I don't know what flooding that might cause elsewhere. There's all sorts of other things you have to consider. The flip side of that, of trying to use sandy stream or any other source to flush the lake more, your detention time is long enough that there is nothing that's going to happen in an individual storm or summer that by routing more water through there, that you're going to significantly change the flushing rate or the detention time. So I don't think that will help a whole lot. It's true that if you can markedly change it, and I think when we added sandy stream, if we assumed it all went in there, like in natural, historically, if that had been part of the watershed, that actually did reduce the detention time, increase the flushing rate, and did make a difference to the background phosphorus concentration. So, but you'd need a lot of water to do that.
And I know 50 years ago, Army Corps and engineers had a plan to address the issue where they dredged up the trestle and screwed that up. That was 50 years ago. During our plan, during our data collection, they did a back flushing study. Some things went wrong on the DEP side with their monitoring equipment. We did get a few storms where we measured the flow coming into the lake during stormwater. That will continue. We hope it will continue this fall. They want to test for the phosphorus, how much phosphorus is coming in from sandy stream, and we need some more data. So it's to be continued.
Yeah, that's another one where getting more data is important, because we don't really know the magnitude of the issue and what then should be done about it.
To be continued.
Dr. Wagner, how far does sandy stream come in before the hydrostatic pressure from the lake equalizes to create its own barrier and then send it back down 25-mile stream?
I do not know. They put out sensors with the intention of finding that sort of thing out, and they only got one storm worth before the thing fell over or whatever. So I don't know. It's a valid question. I think if the water level was high, not a lot would back up. But if the water level is low, like this time of year, quite a bit could get in.
I can show you what I do have, what we have.
What's the current phosphorus level?
Did you hear that, Ken? Current phosphorus level in the lake?
The current phosphorus, I don't remember off the top of my head, but you're like in the teens or low 20s. To give you an idea, anything under 10 micrograms per liter is pretty good. That's considered fairly natural and not likely to cause serious blooms. Although keep in mind that mechanism by which the algae can grow at the sediment water interface and pop up. So it's the sins of the past coming back to haunt you. That can still happen. But the bloom wouldn't last very long. It might not even become a bloom because there's nothing in the upper water to support it if you've got less than 10 micrograms per liter, 10 parts per billion of phosphorus. Once you cross over the 20 line, you've got problems. Over 25 is definitely an issue. 30 is way too high. So it's a pretty narrow range. A lot of the main lakes that are having problems with blooms are somewhere between 15 and 20 on average. Of course, the average isn't what you see in any given day. There's higher and lower. Weather figures into it. The warmer weather favors the cyanobacteria as well. There's a lot of other factors that fix into it. But yeah, you're in a mid-range of phosphorus where knocking 5 or 10 parts per billion off it could make quite a difference.
Yeah, Jen just chimed in. She said the 10-year average was 27. So that's quite high. Did you hear me, Ken? 27. Jen chimed in.
20, yeah. So you're way up there. right. It's higher than I remembered, but yeah, it's a big number. And again, once you're over 20, there's issues. Once you're over 25, almost guaranteed issues. You're above the threshold where we're just sure there's going to be problems. Now, if you got down in the teens, it would decrease. And Jen's done this. She's looked at, okay, if we cut it back by X, if we cut it back by Y, we cut it back by 2X, what do you get? It's just a model. Never confuse a model with reality, but in terms of the direction of change and the order of magnitude, it's pretty good. And it's basically telling you that you need both watershed and in-lake work to get where you need to be. You're probably not ever going to get to the point where you have no threat of blooms. You could, but it'd be a phenomenally expensive effort. But you can get to much better conditions where you're at with reasonable management actions.
Hey, Brian, can you relay the question for me?
Yeah, I'll try.
It's in regards to the potential for algae toxicity when you get outside of the acceptable pH range for the water. In the few instances that happened to the point where they had fish die, in retrospect, can you comment on if those are in lakes that had a large or varied watershed like ours, where high rains could bring external loading of different chemicals or things that will alter the pH? Or in hindsight, is that just related to not titrating it appropriately and very corrected in the future?
Just throw my 2 cents in. When they do the alum treatment, the barge goes on and applies the alum. Another one follows with buffering agent, kind of like baking soda, that keeps that pH at the sweet spot where it needs to be. And
Yeah, that's one of the ways they do it. They're using the alum and the aluminate. The alum makes it go more acidic. The aluminate makes it go more basic. And that's why we use the 2 of those. We don't have to add a non-aluminum chemical into the mix. Those 2 go out simultaneously, not mixed, but separate dosing at the same time though. And you wind up keeping the pH wherever you want it. We like the pH to be pretty close to 7. Now we treat lakes that sometimes have natural pH of 6.2. We will actually put more aluminate in and less alum, so we drive the pH up a little bit to give ourselves a margin of safety and get away from that 6 level that starts to get a little, nerve-wracking. I've had other lakes where unfortunately you went to treat and they were already having a bloom, and the pH often rises when you have blooms because the algae take carbon dioxide out of the water as part of photosynthesis, and that causes the pH to go up. And the pH is already like 8.5, 9 in some cases. You can't put the aluminum in at a very high level, even balanced, you're going to have toxicity issues. So we just put the alum in at a low dose till we drove the pH down, and then we matched them up and kept the pH there. Again, it's become very sophisticated. There really isn't much of a threat unless somebody really messes up. I did hear about one in North Carolina where they had a fish kill. They're still not sure it was actually related to the aluminum, but I could see how it could have been. But again, in New England, where the same people have been doing this work for the last 2 decades, there's not really a threat from that at all.
Dr. Wagner, one more question. In our community down in Florida, I'm in charge of the lakes, and we've had a problem with the bottoms being so sandy that they've started to leak, and without lining them, it was going to be cost prohibitive. So we came up with this solution. It's called soil flock, which is a polymer, 2-part polymer that seal the bottom of the ponds. And I'm wondering, if you use that and seal the bottom of the pond, would that not trap the algae and keep it in place? Because basically what it does is form a polymeric gel that goes on the pond and seals things. So if you did that, would that be a possible solution?
It is a possible solution. There's a whole lot of loose ends in that. For example, is the gel in any way porous so that the phosphorus could leak up through it? Is the gel going to cause even stronger anoxia at the sediment water interface because there's no chance for oxygen to get through and match up? But yeah, the same reason, it's basically sealing the pores and minimizing the ability of water to get out. that should, in theory, minimize the ability of nutrients and other stuff to get in. But I'm not sure, well, of a couple things. One is when they're doing that, it's to treat the sand. They're not treating muck. Muck itself seals the lake. If you had a very mucky lake, you wouldn't be having this problem. That's one of the good things about muck. So treating the muck with a polymer might be very different than treating the sand with one. It might not even react with that polymer. But I have done this in a few lakes, not for that reason, but to clear them of natural organic matter and to get the bottom to not resuspend as much. And it does work. So there's some potential in it. I would not run out and go, oh, here it is, simple answer. Well, we got to do this, it'll get rid of the problem. And keep in mind, it will do nothing for your watershed.
Turn back. This gentleman back. Dave?
The phosphorus screen, a big issue. Correct me if I'm wrong, 25-mile and sandy stream are typically outflows. Correct?
Definitely.
Outflows of the lake.
Until it rains.
Okay, right, exactly. And the
And this
bog is the major inflow. And it looks like it feeds up into one of the biggest parts of the watershed. I think more of the agricultural issues up there.
Yeah.
And it's a huge part of the watershed. So is that where the biggest leak is coming from? In through Carlton Bog into the lake?
According to the models, it is. That's something we're going to touch on at the public hearing when Jen gives her final draft of the watershed protection. That's something we're going to jump to.
Certainly Sandy Stream is a potential issue, but that's one where we do not have the data to be very quantitative about it.
The models, they're basing their numbers off now. So, any other questions? Ken, I have one last question. A price tag on an alum treatment for this lake.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
A price tag for an alum treatment on this lake.
Oh, cost?
No.
Yeah, cost, yes.
How much would it cost for the alum treatment for our lake?
Thank you. That made it very clear. There's too much background noise. Well, I don't know the whole cost because we don't know what the dose would be off the top of our head. And I don't remember also off the top of my head, the area. I don't know, Jen, do you remember what the area was we looked at doing? It's several hundred acres, I believe. But the dose, well, the way you figure it out, and I'll give you a simple round number to work with. Assume $50 per gram per square meter of dose per acre that you treat. So $50 is a given, and I've seen it be as low as 40 and as high as 65. So 50 is a good round number, and that's about where we are right now. In a bigger job, it'll go lower. In a smaller job, it'll go higher. And of course, depends on how close the source of the aluminum chemicals are and all that. But okay, $50 we'll take as a constant. What's the dose going to be in grams per square meter? Well, if I decided that it was somewhere around that sort of typical average for Maine, say 40 grams per square meter, that's 40 times 50 or $2,000 per acre. Now you need to know how many acres it is. I'm sorry I don't have that in front of me, but it's going to be on, it's going to be several hundred acres. Let's just say it was 100 for a nice round number. You got 2,000 times 100, that's $200,000 to do 100 acres. If it was 200 acres, that's $400,000. So, and you've got some monitoring, some other things to throw in, but they're pretty minor costs compared to that. So we're looking at something on the order of $2,000 an acre times whatever number of acres you need to do. We don't know exactly what the dose needs to be, and that needs to be refined. So the 2,000 might not be exactly right. And I can't tell you exactly how many acres. I don't even know that because we don't have enough samples spread out to know exactly where it is. But if we assumed it was somewhere around the 20 foot or wherever there's low oxygen, so deeper than say 20, 25 feet, I think 7 meters is the worst you've had. So 23 feet, take that area, multiply it out. And again, I think we've done some of this in the report. It's just nothing I committed to memory. But that gives you some idea of the cost level. This is not a $2,000 total treatment. It's also not a $2 million total treatment, because that's a ridiculous range that doesn't help you much. If you work with the simple $2,000 per acre, you're not going to be way off. because it's not going to be way different than 40 grams per square meter. I doubt it would be twice it. I doubt it would be half it. So that's a reasonable starting number. And then we just have to know how many acres you're treating. Somebody know off the top of your head what the total acreage of the lake is? I don't even remember that.
2,500.
Okay, so you're looking at probably a third of that at least. So you're looking at, 800 acres. So that's $1.6 million.
In your report, you estimated 700,000.
Okay, well, then that was a smaller area. Yeah, again, I don't have this in front of me, but you can rely on what was in the report as our best effort.
So in his report, he did estimate it at $700,000. And then pumping stations generally, I believe he estimated at $100,000
Per year or?
for the pumping stations, and then the maintenance per year and how it goes.
But this discussion is exactly why you go get the numbers and lay it out. Me saying something and me, well, around this, it is useless. It's got to be based on real data and a real understanding of what's where. We have some feel for how much phosphorus is in some of the sediment. We know where the oxygen is low, so we can get an area. And we're multiplying. Again, all this will be explained in the report. It's all there, and it's all transparent. It shows you where we get the numbers from. But it's also going to tell you that we're not dead sure of the numbers because we don't have a lot of sediment data.
So what's it cost per sediment core on average?
I'm sorry, say again.
What is the cost per sediment core? So you said you needed 10 sediment cores to actually, properly sort of build out your model.
What does it cost to build the model, you're saying?
Core samples. How much does it cost to get core samples?
How much?
Understand. Have better data for your model.
How much does it cost to get a core sample to get a better model?
Oh, thank you. I don't know why I'm getting horrible echo when they're further away from it, but whoever's sitting right by the microphone, it sounds great. Okay. You have a day of labor to go out and get a bunch of core samples. So you got to divide that among your samples. But obviously, if you only go out and get one, which you wouldn't be doing, it's hard to say exactly what that costs. But the actual cost to test it, it's hundreds of dollars. I mean, if you did everything you could do and did the assays and everything else, maybe $500 a sample. Again, there's a sliding scale. The more you do, the less expensive it gets. I usually think in terms of about $300 a sample if I have to give a round number for the analysis. And again, you could go out and get all the core samples you needed in one day. So you got a day of labor, a couple people in a boat, call it $1,500 or $2,000. And then if you did, say, a dozen samples at $300 a piece, that's $3,600. So less than $5,000, to get the information you need potentially. If we added on the assays and did some more stuff, it might increase it, but it wouldn't be 10,000.
One thing I'm a little confused on, Carlton's inflowing at the north end of the lake. North end of the lake is typically the shallowest. I assume most of the sediment coming into the lake is coming through Carlton over time. Is it more beneficial to treat the low oxygenated deeper part of the lake or the part of the lake that probably has the most sediment?
From what I understand,
The deeper part. Again, the process we're most concerned with here is iron-bound phosphorus dissociating and becoming available when there's low oxygen. So you want to treat wherever there's low oxygen. That's going to occur in the deeper part of the water. It's going to be worse at the deepest point, and it's going to diminish as you get into shallower and shallower water. It is typically, you almost never see low oxygen shallower than about 15 feet. Not impossible, but unusual. And you almost always see it deeper than 30 feet. So somewhere between 15 and 30 feet. And again, my recollection was about 7 meters was the shallowest we had low oxygen. So that's 23 feet thereabouts. So if you had that, the only area deeper than 23 feet would become your target area. And that would be way better than if you treat the shallower areas with the torture sediment. They have way less phosphorus in them, and they're not subject to that low oxygen that causes it to be released.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna cut it there. Arlene, go ahead. One more.
One question. When I was a kid, about 80 years ago, we used to have flashboards where the river is. And the water was always high all summer long. And we'd always know when they was taking them down. It was flush. Is there any reason they can't go back to that?
Well, he did speak on that earlier. And like he said, it would take 20 years for us to see any results. A long time.
So, but that was based off of an example where there was 100, the lake was already at 100 milligrams of phosphorus per whatever area, and we're at 27. So if we're just trying to get from 27 down to 15, like you could theoretically see that could take less than 5 years. I don't know, like that would be my math.
Ken, did he catch any of that?
No.
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 We're gonna go, we can touch back on that. Send me an email and I will send.
Is there gonna be a pre-report to the meeting?
Yes.
So that we can like go with like.
Yeah,
actual, like,
we'll set it up and we'll send it all. All right. Ken.
Yep.
Ken, I want to thank you for, thank you for.
You're welcome. Hopefully that makes some sense out of it.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions-
Jen is on. Jen, do you want to add anything to that? To be any corrections or clarifications?
No, I would just add to the question that was just asked. With the low flushing rate and the very flat topography that Unity Pond with the outlet being much wetland area, it's going to be very difficult to flush a lot of water out of Unity Pond very effectively. This has been discussed at numerous technical advisory committee meetings with Maine DEP and others. And so for that reason, we don't think it's a viable solution for Unity Pond. We can talk more about it at the public meeting, but I did want to just address that. It's just because of the certain physical characteristics of the lake in the watershed, it's not like the best solution for Unity Pond to try to flush it out.
Yeah, and as I've explained, in the theoretical sense, it's not going to give you rapid results. It's going to be a very, very slow process, probably beyond the lifetime of anybody in the room right now.
And you also have to, deal with, not being able to have a boat in the water at your dock. It might just be sitting on the bottom of the lake. If you look at Sebasticook's, their drawdown, they have 10-foot drawdowns. So for part of the year, their shoreline looks like a mud flat. So if that's, you have to balance that use and it just doesn't seem like a good opportunity for Unity. But I look forward to seeing all of you hopefully at the public meeting in September. We'll have a lot more information, more specifics regarding where the loading is coming from and where the target areas are for doing the restoration to start reducing phosphorus levels in the lake.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, thanks.
I will bow out. Hopefully I was helpful to you. It's a good group. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Ken.
Take
Okay,
care.
well, done. We got Lake Association.